Shabbat Shalom. Well, this Shabbat, have we've come to the end of our, well, never really the end, but certainly what I've wanted to share concerning the question of the deity of Christ and the doctrine of the Trinity. So I thought what I'd like to do next, um, before getting back into any kind of verse by verse, book by book, which is what I do value the most. Exegesis of the scripture, systematic exegesis of the scriptures is what I do value the most, and I think is most important. But what I did feel I needed to do next is to just address the question of Israel again. Renewed debates have arisen in my social media, and certainly with what's going on in Israel has brought the spotlight back onto Israel and the Jews, and a great resurgence of anti-Semitism worldwide. And so I thought it would be good to just touch on it again. So this is going to be a very quick, largely my own opinions, which is something I really don't like to do from the usually. But I have found that in discussions with friends on social media, particularly my atheistic friends, certainly I have been accused of being arrogant and of being kind of a know-it-all and of being the one who has all the answers and everything right, and everyone else is just stupid. And so these are the kinds of accusations I have received. It's not the first time, and it's really troubling. It's not troubling. It's troubling that should be the way I am perceived. What I do is my only hope is that everyone will find this book and the truths in this book. And so my life focus is to search, research, and know this book as well as I can, this being the Bible, and find my answers for everything in this book. And so when it comes to Israel, there's a lot in this book about Israel, because it is the God of Israel that this book is centered on. And so Israel, the people, the nation, and the land is central to this book for a number of reasons, which I have tried to explain in this book, a book that I wrote on my second trip to Israel. It's the first half is an attempt at explaining the Israel situation, who Israel is and what Israel is, and because both atheists and Christians get it wrong, and this is where I'm accused of being the know-it-all, because I think I've got it right and everyone else has got it wrong. So many and both groups have got it wrong, and so it's not because I'm super intelligent or know anything better. I'm not. I'm not an academic and I'm not an intellectual, and I don't know any better than the next person. But what I do is I base my focus is on the scriptures, on the Bible, and what and how we view the world, this physical world that we live in and have to make head and tail of it, how we view it, and where we get our opinions and our truths from. And so it comes down to this book. So I've tried to. What I'm going to share this morning is in much more detail in what I've written. So you're welcome to have what I've written in digital form. I'll send it out to anyone who wants to know. I'm open to debate. The first section of this talk is directed to my atheistic friends, and I hope that you will sit through the whole talk, because when I get to the Bible, you'll probably get irritated and want to zone out. But it may well help, at the very least, to provoke inquiry, to provoke the idea that the situation of Israel, the atheists coming from a very much more political perspective, is not as cut and dry as you think it may be. So from the political perspective, you think that you've got all the answers and you understand what's going on, and the rest of us are just not seeing the political wranglings behind the scenes, and so we are missing the boat, and so Israel is to blame for X, Y, and Z, and we're not seeing it because we don't see the forces at work behind the scenes, the powers at play from a physical human perspective. Because as a Christian, as a Bible believer, I would say that you guys are not seeing the spiritual forces at play. Anyway, getting to that. So I would hope that you would persevere and see it through, because you will find that what I'm about to share with you is also not generally saying, oh, well, you're coming from the Christian perspective and you guys think you know what the Christian perspective is because you have it plastered all over social media and everywhere, and that would be predominantly the pro-Israel, would be predominantly, from a Christian perspective, would be predominantly the evangelical church of North America, and so that's the most kind of publicly known, and so you would immediately think that my ideas and impressions are coming from that perspective, and you might have a good idea of what they're teaching, and you might think, well, you know what I'm going to say. I would suggest that, well, I'm not going to say what you think I'm going to say. So first of all, some of the issues that my atheist friends have, and again, I'm just going to do a quick run through. So every point I make can be a whole conversation all on its own, and I'll be happy to have those conversations. I do not object to disagreement, to uh, uh, um, 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 passionate disagreement, to debate. I'm open to debate. I'm open to discussions. I'm open to all of that. What I do object to, what I do not like, is when things get personal and insulting, personally insulting. So you might think my opinion is off the wall, and you can say so. But if you start swearing at me using bad language, and if you start just getting personally derogatory, then that's kind of where the discussion ends. So I have no problem discussing the details and different ideas and differences of opinions and all of that. I'm happy to do that. And so every point I'm going to make is a discussion on its own. So I'm just going to go very quickly because I want to cover a lot of ground, and so I'm just going to put it out there, and then I'll leave it up to discussions to go deeper into the evidences for what I say, why I say what I say, and the backwards and forwards of why that is the way it is or not the way it is, and so on. So one of the first objections that my atheist friends would have is the very idea of Israel's desire, hatikva, the hope that Jews have of a homeland. That very idea, particularly coming from the South African perspective. I'm South African. Most of my atheist friends that I debate are South Africans. And so from the South African perspective, and I'm now referring to the atheist friends that are generally left-wing. And so just that hope, the hope of a Jewish homeland, smacks of Jewish nationalism, which evokes in the South African heart and mind nationalism. And so in South African context, it would be something akin to Orania. And certainly Zionism, that movement, the Zionist movement, which is the movement towards a national homeland for the Jews, is kind of put in the same light as the Afrikaner nationalistic ideals for a homeland for themselves, one particular racial group. And so that very idea from the start is a negative in the mind of, and something to be opposed in the mind of certainly a left thinking atheist. Even left thinking Christians, or even many left thinking Jews. Okay, so that's the first thing. So the Jewish state, as a secular state, the whole idea of a secular state is so that it would be inclusive. So the resistance to a Zionist state, from certainly the South African perspective, is that whole idea of racism, whereas the reality of the Zionist ideal is counter to that. The whole idea of Herzog to have a secular state rather than a religious state, which is why the Orthodox Jews oppose the Zionist state, is because of the ideals for inclusivity. And so in Israel, you have inclusivity. You have an open society of mixed races, mixed religious persuasions, and all coexisting fairly harmoniously as they can. So that's the first issue. The second issue is an issue which my wife and I discussed at length over the COVID period, because of the globalist agenda. And so we were amazed when COVID hit, because of my studies and teaching on biblical eschatology. I never saw the whole COVID issue. I never saw it as a real thing. I never saw it as it was a real thing. It is a real thing. But what was promoted and what was put forward, and certainly what the solutions that were promoted were given, I never went along with that. I never bought into that, because I was looking at it from an eschatological perspective, and the timing all fell very neatly into place. And so I figured something's going on here. And then when we began to identify the fact that many professing atheists, those who don't believe the Bible and don't believe the God of the Bible, were seeing the truth of the lies in the whole COVID narrative. When that began to unfold, my wife and I kind of looked at this and thought, well, what's this all about? Because if it's kind of fits the biblical eschatological time frame, why is it that so many atheists are seeing the truth, but so much of the church, huge percentage of the church, were completely taken in with the lie? And so that was like a huge question mark. And what I've discovered along the way is the nature of deception. And so there has to be a certain measure of truth in order to bring in a deception. Is you completely believe that you are correct. You completely believe that this is the truth. These are the answers, and so on. And then it's not, and that is deception. So it's much more difficult to identify than a blatant lie. And so what we have is evidence. We need to have in everything that we do and we believe and we pursue. It should be based on a measure of evidence. Not everything can be so cut and dry. Not everything there does need to be a measure of faith, as well as, and I would say not just religion. So in atheism, to have no God in the equation requires a measure of faith. There's evidence is debatable. So the point is, evidence is really the nuts and bolts, the hard, the stuff that we can really put our trust in, because it's hard, it's tactile, it's solid, it's there, it's foundational. It's when you have evidence, you have more to go on than just an idea or your opinion. And so what I would say is that for our atheist friends, there is a major body of evidence missing. And so this is been, I see it, in things like evolution. When you're trying to understand how things came into being, how the world began, and how things that we see formed. If you only fix your attention on one body of evidence, and then you draw conclusions from that evidence, which is narrow, because it's only it's disregarding the evidence on this side. We're only looking at that. The reason why science is changeable is because when new evidence is discovered, then the interpretations have to be reevaluated. The interpretations based on the prior evidence have to be reevaluated when new evidence is presented. And so as technology improves and you get lenses that are more powerful, and you can look deeper into things, and you see that there are things behind this thing that we never knew existed. And those things now explain more clearly why this is the way it is. And so we can understand that from a physical, practical point of view. My argument is that if the Bible is disregarded as a body of evidence, then trying to understand the situation is lacking a huge body of evidence. And so one can never come to the truth, the correct understanding and interpretation of things if that is ignored. So my atheist friends ignore the scriptures, and that has been facilitated by our evangelical friends who have misinterpreted and misused this unique body of evidence that we have. So that brings me to Jews and Christians. So we have the atheists on the one hand that are missing a huge body of evidence. Then we have Jews and Christians which have that body of evidence, and yet even they are off base. Why? So the Jews don't have the New Testament. They don't pay any attention to the New Testament. And the church largely doesn't pay much attention to the Old Testament. And the church largely has decided that the church, whenever the scriptures refer to Israel, the church is now the new Israel. So this is a school of thought called replacement theology, in which the church replaces Israel. The church is the physical Israel, was the Old Testament, in which God made promises to the physical Israel. The church in the New Testament is now the spiritual Israel, to which those Old Testament promises apply. They don't apply the judgments of the Old Testament, only the promises. And so we have these two groups who do use the scriptures, who are also getting it wrong because of the way they use the scriptures and the way that they interpret and understand. So the Jews consider Christians to be blasphemous because of their doctrines of God. And so another whole long story, which I don't completely disagree with. And then the church, the early church fathers, were the culprits, were the ones who began this whole thinking along the lines of replacement theology, who coined the phrase, the term Christ killers, with reference to the Jews. And so in the early church, in the first century, the next generation after the disciples, they're the ones who began really formulating the church doctrines, um, which eventually were then adopted 300 years later. So these early church fathers, there was huge division between the Jews and the Christians, and even messianic in the apostles' days, the messianic believers, the Jews who believed that Jesus, Yeshua, is the Messiah, had differences with the Gentile believers, and so these two groups kind of rubbed each other up the wrong way, and ultimately the Gentile believers became dominant, became um, the majority, and and referred to Jews as Christ killers, because it was the Jewish authorities who pushed for the execution of Yeshua. And so we have, resulting from that, we have the church beginning to look negatively at Jews, and how do they fit then as Gentiles who now believe, um, they put themselves in place of Israel. Israel had its chance, and Israel is now uh, over, and the church is now the new Israel. And so we have this issue of who's the true Israel. Um, so what happens with things like uh, uh, ep- epithets that are put onto groups, onto people or groups of people, in this case the Jews being referred to as Christ killers, it groups everyone into the same camp. And so when Gentiles look at Jews in general, they see Christ killers. And so they don't go back in history to have a look at what was going on. And it was a small group of religious leaders. The group of the Pharisees were the smallest of the Jewish sects, who was really pushing for the execution of the Messiah. And and so it was a small group of religious leaders. It was the religious leaders, not all of them, but it was the religious leaders who had other political and personal ambitions, who pushed for the execution of the Messiah. At the end of the day, Yeshua said himself, "No one takes my life. I give it up of my own accord." So at the end of the day, it was Yeshua himself who gives up his life for the sins of the world, which means if it wasn't for the sins of the world, he wouldn't have had to die. Therefore, it's the world, everyone who sins. We are all Christ killers. We are all responsible. So it's not those who actually pull the trigger, as it were, are not solely responsible. We all are. And certainly it's not one ethnic group, the Jews. The Romans were the ones who killed the Messiah. And so we can't, and so in the same way, today we have the same situation in which Israel, there are some who do bad things, and they happen to be Jews, and then it is seen as being Israel who do these things, and then it is again seen as Jews who do these things. I watched a thing just the other day, in which certain the powers that be in the world was being discussed, and the topic of discussion and the documentary was about these a an elite who are controlling the world essentially. And so that was what the documentary was about. But if you didn't know that that was what the documentary was about, you would have thought that the documentary was about Jews and the evil of Jews, because constantly the refrain was, he's a Jew, and this one is a Jew, and that one is a Jew. It was a focus on the ethnicity of certain people. Whenever someone was spoken of who was not a Jew, it was never stated that this person, oh, he's a Gentile, and this person is also involved, and he's a North African, or he's a Greek, or he's a Brit, or he's Scandinavian. Never. Only when the Jew is identified, when the person is identified, his ethnicity is added. Why? Why? The whole documentary was not about Jews. It was about a certain elite group. The fact that many of those elites who control the puppet strings of the world happen to be Jews is an interesting point, which I'm coming to shortly. So we have another group. We have the religious Jews who regard Christians as blasphemous. We have the majority of the church who regard Jews as the enemy, and the church is now the new spiritual Israel. How they figure that the church is now getting everything right is beyond me. And then we have the third group, which is what I've already mentioned, the North evangelicals, the North American evangelicals, which the majority of the evangelical church worldwide kind of emulates, follows, who, not all, but many of the predominantly evangelical church that are pro-Israel. And so they are almost fawning over Israel. And anything that Israel does, or should I say, nothing that Israel does is bad or deserves criticism. Israel is holy, Israel is righteous, and Israel only does good. And so this is those who are referred to as those who fawn over Israel just because it's Israel, who fawn over Jews just because they are Jews. So this group don't see the bad. They don't want to see any of the bad. They don't. They don't. And so there's an imbalance in understanding. So what certainly from the Christian perspective. So now my atheist friends won't care about this aspect of the discussion, but certainly from the Christian perspective, we have to be able to see clearly. We have to be able to see the truth. We should be those who are most desirous of truth. And so we should be those who seek truth. And sometimes truths are hard to swallow, because sometimes our favorite is not as good as we hoped they would be. And so certainly I've in my life have had many idols that I put on pedestals fall off because they didn't turn out to be as idyllic as I thought they were. So from a Christian perspective, from one who considers myself to be the younger brother of my Jewish older brother, I have Jewish roots, which is a different story altogether. So for the sake of the argument, I consider myself to be a Gentile Christian who looks to Israel, to the Jews, as being my older brother. I identify many of the areas where certain groups fall short or do terrible things, and and my heart breaks, and this is the crux of the issue, is when we, just like the epithet Christ killers, put Jews collectively into a camp under a title, under a derogatory, a condemnatory image. So when we identify that there are Jews who are engaged in part of the whole globalist agenda, and many are champions of that agenda, and certainly leaders and innovators in that agenda, then what happens is, oh, they're Jews, and then again it brings this collective stigma onto Jews and Israel and the Zionist state, dare I say, brings it all under the same umbrella, and then it becomes the enemy, the negative. And this is how peace-loving leftist thinkers who wouldn't want to hurt a fly would rather support a murderous regime, or at the very least blame Israel for the fact that Hamas does what it does. It's Israel's fault. And so, in a sense, indirectly supporting Hamas. So this is now the third aspect of what I want to get to, and this is where my atheist friends would want to zone out, because this is now the biblical perspective. Those are all the man's ideas, but what is the biblical perspective? What should our attitude towards Israel be from the biblical perspective? And I would encourage my atheist friends to stick around a little bit longer, because it will at least prod your understanding, the idea that it's not as cut and dried as just the political perspective of wrangling of nations, wrangling of governments, trying to come to this power play of who wants oil and who wants a trade route through where, and how are we orchestrating, because there's no doubt that this is what governments do. They've been doing it for hundreds of years. War is one of the primary sources of revenue for countries. So, I mean, you just take the 100 Years' War as an example. Why on earth would Britain and France fight each other for 100 years when there's a great, not a great big ocean, there's a channel, but there's sea between them. So there's no great threat of France taking, or vice versa. They certainly didn't have missiles to launch over each other. Anyway, so the point is that these things happen. But it's not, in the case of Israel, because we're dealing with the people of the God of this book. It's different. It's very different. It's very much more complicated. Not complicated, but the web is much more intricate. It's not complicated to understand, but the web is much more intricate. So it's not a simple case of, oh, well, Israel's a bad government and they're in cahoots with America and they're just trying to take over the world. It's not that simple. And it's not like that. So all of that is man's thinking, but what do the scriptures say? What is God's perspective on Israel, and therefore what should certainly us as Christians, if we believe this book and the God of this book, then we should be of the same mind as the God of this book. And so right up front, I will say, and I'll say it again and again and again, it's kind of become my mantra, that if you claim to love the God of this book, then you cannot have anything but concern, at least concern. If not love, then at least concern for our older brother Israel. And I'm going to show you now that Israel as a nation is never done away with. And so the church does not replace the physical nation of Israel. And so we see God's plan I'll give it to you very briefly, and then I'll give you the script, give you a bunch of scriptures to just to. God's plan is this. First of all, Israel was raised by God. This is something I'll go into in a bit of detail in my book. That Israel wasn't a nation that was chosen out of many nations. That okay, this nation over here is the cool one. I'm going to take that nation. It was a man, Abraham. There was a man. It wasn't a nation. He was in Ur of the Chaldees, which is today Iran, Iraq, Babylon, on the Euphrates River. And he brings him out. And in time, through a process, he creates a nation out of the descendants of Abraham. And he gives that nation a language, a religion, and a culture, a government, and a system of governance. So he creates out of this group of people who ended up as slaves in Egypt, he creates a nation, and he gives them a blueprint of how to live, how to be, how to exist in this world as a people. And he gives them some very unique aspects that cause them to be, not only is their culture different, but their physical appearance, everything about them is very unique, very different to all the other cultures around them. That was on purpose. They are meant to be different and look different. So he tells us in Genesis 12 verse 2, he tells Abraham that he is, I want to read it. Okay, I was going to give you the scriptures later, but let me give it to you now. Genesis 12 verse 2, he says, I'll go from 1. Then Yahuwah said to, Yahuwah is the Hebrew name, the tetragrammaton, Yud He Vav He, the personal name of God. Then Yahuwah said to Avram, get going out from the land and from your relatives and from your father's house to the land that I will show you. My heart's desire is to make you into a great nation and bless you. This is God talking, remember? To make your name great so that you may be a blessing. My desire is to bless those who bless you. But whoever curses you, I will curse. And in you, this is the crux, all the families of the earth will be blessed. In you, Abraham, in your offspring, what we know through the subsequent history, through the nation of Israel, the children of Abraham, all the nations of the earth will be blessed. This is the plan of God for Israel. This was the purpose of God creating the nation of Israel, to be a blessing to the nations of the earth. So therefore, it is no surprise that the leaders in the world, in every sphere, good and bad, I might add, should be predominantly Jews. Why? Because God blessed them. God equipped them to be the pinnacle. Now, this is kind of where left-thinking, my left-thinking friends will start to get uncomfortable again, because it sounds like racial prejudice, but we just have to look at the realities. It's not to say that that they are better in aspects, but not in value to God, not in essence. No one is better than anyone else in essence, in value to God, in value. I may be better at art than the next person. Someone else is better at maths than me. But in our value, we are all the same, because we are, as human beings, we are all created in the image of God. We are all of one value to God, and we should be to each other. But we can be better than each other in skills and abilities and whatever. So God makes them, equips them to be exceptional. And it is, a study has been done by Henry Harpending and Gregory Cochran. I've got a link to an article on this issue, that the Jews have on average a much higher IQ than the rest of the world. 107 to 117 average IQ of Jews, whereas the world's average IQ is 100. We know that they dominate in Nobel prizes, in industry and innovation, in technology. The 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 achievements of Jews in proportion to their um, uh, numeric demographic in the world is off the charts compared to all the other nations combined. Why is that? I mean, that's not an opinion. That's not, you know, just elevating the Jews. That's just a fact. You can do the research, you can look it up. That's a fact. Why is that? Why should it be that way? How come it's that way? My personal theory is because God has equipped the Jews to excel, to be the leaders. Why? Because he promised Avram that he would be a blessing to the world, that his offspring, the nation that would come out of him, would be a blessing to the world. Primarily because salvation would come through that ethnic group. It would come through the Jews. Salvation comes through the Jews. Yeshua, Jesus, the Messiah, is a Jew. Before the Messiah came, the nation Israel was meant to be a blessing to the world by introducing them to the Creator God, their Creator, the God that created everything. The Jews had an intimate relationship and knowledge of that God. And it was their task, their role. The scripture says in Luke 12, verse 48, that to whom much is given, from them is much required. That means that the Jews were given this, they were equipped with the potential, the ability to be the leaders, to be the blessing to the world. And the primary blessing that they were to be was to introduce the world to this God, who they knew and understood to be the creator of the earth, the creator of all people. Remember, I read the passage in Genesis 12, verse 2. It doesn't say that you will be a blessing to the Jews. It doesn't say that you will be a blessing to your offspring, that your family will be blessed. It says that you will be a blessing, that all the families of the earth will be blessed. All the families of the earth will be blessed. That's all the nations, all peoples were meant to be blessed through Israel. By Israel presenting to the world this God who is everyone's creator. It's all of our God. We have turned our back on God, and so Israel's role and responsibility was to reintroduce us to this God. And this is why they were given the culture, the governance, all of Israel's ways and life and history, the things that God gave to Israel, to the way that were to live, and are to live, is meant to demonstrate the standards and principles and precepts of the kingdom of heaven. These ways, if we live according to this book, we will live a life so much more wonderful and abundant than the way we do live. And that's another long story. Okay. So Israel, the fact that there are leaders, there are those in high places who are committing the most horrendous atrocities in the name of progress or whatever their motivation is for it, who many of my atheist friends would affirm and identify. It's for that reason, and for the reason that Israel failed to present God to the world and keep him to themselves, which is why Israel is to be chastised. There is a final judgment throughout Israel's history. We have this up and down, as they worship God, and then they turn their back on God, and then God chastises them. He brings judgment on them, which is a chastisement. Hebrews chapter 12, verse 6 tells us that God disciplines those he loves, which is my final point I'm coming to, is what is God's attitude to Israel? He disciplines those he loves. And so, time and again, Israel has been chastised, has been disciplined. There is coming a time when Israel, it's called the time of Jacob's trouble. It's the worst chastisement yet. And the reason for that, I believe, is because of everything I've just mentioned, the failure to present God to the world. And then, in addition to that, and even not only not presenting God to the world, but then actively engaging in many of the evils that the enemy is causing to bring about the demise of the world. And so that's, again, another whole long story. But it does not mean that God has turned his back on Israel. And so if we go to Deuteronomy, final passages before we close, Deuteronomy chapter 7, verse 6. I'm going to run through these very quickly. For you are a holy people to Yahuwah your God. From all the peoples on the face of the earth, Yahuwah your God has chosen you to be his treasured people. That is the attitude of God to Israel. They are his treasured people. He chose them, as I said before, he created them. Of all the peoples of the world, he creates a people to be his treasured possession. So this is his attitude to them. He treasures them. Deuteronomy chapter 10, verse 15. Only on your fathers did Yahuwah set his affection to love them, and he chose their descendants after them, you from all the peoples, as is the case this day. So this is Moses talking to Israel before Moses is about to die, and Israel is about to go in and take the promised land. And so this is his last letter, as it were, to Israel, and he affirms again that they are his treasured possession. They are the chosen of God. Yahuwah, God, has set his affection on them. He's set his affection to love them. This is what God feels about Israel. He loves them. He has chosen to set his affection on them. Isaiah chapter 43, verse 1. But now, thus says Yahuwah, the one who created you, O Yaakov. Jacob, his name was changed to Israel. He was the father of Israel. The one who formed you, O Israel. Fear not. Fear not, for I have redeemed you. I have called you by name. You are mine. Zechariah 2. Zechariah 2, verse 8 to 12. I'll go from verse 7. Then behold, the angel speaking with me left, and another angel went out to meet him, saying to him, Run, speak to this young man, saying, Jerusalem will be inhabited as a village without walls, because of the great number of men and livestock in it. For it is a declaration of Yahuwah, will be a wall of fire around it, and I will be the glory inside it. Oi, oi, flee from the land of the north. It is a declaration of Yahuwah, because I scattered you like the four winds of heaven. It is a declaration of Yahuwah. O Zion, escape. You are living with the daughter of Bavel. For thus says Yahuwah Tsabaoth, He has sent me after glory to the nations that plundered you. Because whoever touches you touches the apple of his eye. For behold, I will shake my hand against them, and they will be plunder to their servants. So again, not only does God love Israel, but Israel will be restored to the land. So 1948, many, certainly of the evangelicals, regard 1948 as fulfillment of all the promises to restore Israel to their land. I believe it was part, or should I say the start of that fulfillment, but it's not the fulfillment of what God promises. When Israel is fully restored to the land, it will be fully restored really when Yeshua comes back and he will rule and reign for 1,000 years. That is when the fulfillment of the promises to restore Israel happens completely. Then there will be no more war, no more suffering, no more heartache. Okay, so Jeremiah 31. I'll just do Jeremiah 31. Jeremiah 31, verse 19. Is Ephraim a precious son to me? Is he a delightful child? For as often as I spoke against him, I still certainly remember him. Therefore my heart yearns for him. I will surely have compassion on him. It is a declaration of Yahuwah. Ephraim is Joseph's son, one of the became synonymous with the 10 tribes that were taken into captivity in Syria and lost. And so a reference to Ephraim is reference to Israel. Judah was south, stayed in the land for 100 or more years after, until they were taken captive to Babylon. So again, an affirmation not only that God loves them, but that he will restore them. Even though he has chastised them, even though it was necessary to discipline them, he yet still loves them and will still reward them. Isaiah 43 verse 4, Psalm 47 verse 5, Malachi 1 verse 2 to 3, Romans 9 verse 13, 1 Kings 10 verse 9, Hosea 11 1 and 3 1, Romans 11 verse 25, Psalm 130 verse 7, 122 verse 6, 94 verse 14. I think I've mentioned Isaiah 49. No, Isaiah 49 verses 15 to 16, all references and many more of God's love for Israel, and in many cases the promise for restoration. Just two passages, one from Jeremiah, one from Isaiah, to illustrate to my Christian replacement theology friends that it is the physical nation of Israel. We as the church do not replace the physical nation of Israel. These promises still pertain to the physical nation of Israel. Jeremiah 31, verses 3 to 76. I'm a bit confused because this Bible is different. Verse 2 to 76. From afar, Yahuwah appeared to me. Yes, I have loved you with an everlasting love. Everlasting love. Therefore, I have drawn you with loving kindness. Again, I will build you, so you will be rebuilt, virgin Israel. Again, you will take up your tambourines as ornaments and go out to dances of merrymakers. Again, you will plant vineyards on the hills of Samaria. Planters will plant and use them, for there will be a day when a watchman will call out in the hill country of Ephraim, Arise, let us go up to Zion, to Yahuwah our God. For thus says Yahuwah, Sing aloud with joy for Yaakov, shout with the chief of the nations, proclaim, give praise, and say, Yahuwah, save your people, the remnant of Israel. Behold, I will bring them from the north country, and I will gather them from the ends of the earth. Among them, the blind and the lame, the pregnant, together with she who is in labor with child. A great throng will return here. And so, again and again, there are a number of promises concerning the restoration of Israel, the physical nation of Israel. He makes this very clear in verses 34 to 40. He says, Thus says Yahuwah, who gives the sun as a light by day and the fixed order of the moon and the stars as a light by night, who stirs up the sea so its waves roar. Yahuwah Tsabaoth is his name. Only if this fixed order departs from me, sun, moon, and stars, if this fixed order departs from me, it is a declaration of Yahuwah, then also might Israel's offspring cease from being a nation before me for all time. Thus says Yahuwah, only if heaven above can be measured and the foundations of the earth searched out beneath, then also I will cast off the offspring of Israel for all they have done. It is a declaration of Yahuwah. Behold, days are coming. It is declaration of Yahuwah when the city will be rebuilt for Yahuwah from the tower of Hananel to the corner gate. And he goes on to describe the restoration of Israel. So essentially what he's saying is Israel will be chastised. Israel is chastised, but it's not forever, and she will be restored. It's clear, it's explicit. Even only if these natural orders can depart, only if you can go and measure the heavens, will Israel cease to be a nation before God. And then you might be saying, oh, well, that's all Old Testament, and Paul makes it very explicit. Romans chapter 11, verse 1 and 2, and verses 11 and 12. I say then, has God not rejected his people? Has he? May it never be. For I too am an Israelite of the seed of Abraham, of the tribe of Benjamin. God has not rejected his people, whom he knew beforehand. He's making it very clear by giving his genealogy that he's speaking about the physical Israel, not the spiritual Israel. People use Romans 8, 9, and 10 to say that, oh, well, Israel is now spiritual, no longer physical. It's a misinterpretation of what Paul is saying. 11, verses 11 to 12. Chapter 11, verses 11 to 12. I say then, they did not stumble, Israel did not stumble so as to fall, did they? May it never be. But by their false step, salvation has come to the Gentiles to provoke Israel to jealousy. Now, if their transgression leads to riches for the world, and their loss riches for the Gentiles, then how much more their fullness? But I am speaking to you who are Gentiles, insofar as I'm an emissary to the Gentiles. I spotlight my ministry if somehow I might provoke to jealousy my own flesh and blood and save some of them. For if the rejection leads to the reconciliation of the world, what will their acceptance be but life from the dead? He goes on then to speak about being grafted in, the Gentiles being grafted into Israel as the root, and not boasting. The Gentiles should therefore not boast about their position, because they are wild branches which have been grafted into the root, and God is well able to regraft the natural branches, and the natural branches belong there more than the wild branches. And so the wild branches should not boast over the natural branches, which is exactly where we see the church today, boasting over Israel. So Paul makes it clear and explicit that God is not finished with the nation of Israel. We should not be boasting over Israel, our position above Israel. Rather, we should be, as one does with their own family, we should be mourning over their disobedience because of what we know is coming, what the chastisement involves, and doing all that we can to help them see the error in their ways and turn to their God. The majority of Israel today is secular, and this is a blight on the page of Israel, just like it was in ages past when God brought judgment, chastisement on Israel because of their rejection of him. And so we don't stand on the sidelines with their enemies, throwing stones at them, joining their enemies in throwing stones at them. We love them and we do our best to help them to see. And so these things are best done privately, as you would with your family. You wouldn't be doing it on social media. You wouldn't be pointing out their errors to them where it's going to bolster their enemies. And so we can love them by speaking the truth. And so I hope that helps. I hope it sheds some light, and especially to my atheist friends, at least to illustrate that the bigger picture, if you're only looking at it from the physical, political perspective, and you disregard the Bible because you don't believe in it, and you don't believe in the God of the Bible, and you think that all of that is pie in the sky, then it's never going to be a clear picture, and you will most likely oppose Israel, and it will be for the wrong reasons. Half of what Israel is accused of is not true, and just from the political perspective. So I'm open to discussion. Shabbat Shalom, and see you next week.